generation of warfare, psychological warfare. In modern conflict, the mind is a potent weapon. Discover General Michael T. Flynn's groundbreaking guide, The Citizen's Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare. Unlock tactics, strategies, and the mindset to navigate this cognitive battlefield that we all find ourselves in. Equip yourself against manipulation and emerge unscathed. Unleash your potential. Order now.
Welcome back, you guys. This is the Alpha Warrior Show. I am your host, Alpha, and we are looking at part number 7 in Operation Gladio. And I think part 6 is probably going to be the most viewed part out of all of them. I mean, not even just clearing 3 days from that part 6, and over 25,000 views. And then that's a testament to all of you guys that watch this show and share that information and are making people say, well, what the heck is this? And I want to learn. And today's not going to be any different. But before we do, let me get to our first sponsor, you guys, Goldco. So right now, we don't know what the future holds for our money. So that's why I've bought a little bit of precious metals like gold and silver. I also don't got a lot, but I want to make sure I don't fall behind. And it's also one of the reasons that I partner with Goldco, because now I can give you something that I think you'll love. So go to alphalikesgold.com to get your free gold and silver kit, which will show you how to get into precious metals tax-free and penalty-free. Even if your money's still in a retirement account like an IRA or a 401k, you can still do these programs, because a lot of people are like, Alpha, but my money's in a retirement account. Reach out to them. They'll show you how you can make that transition and how easy it is. So the writing's on the wall, you guys. You know, the economy doesn't look promising. Biden doesn't have our confidence. So just do what you need to do to have information. Go to alphalikesgold.com to get your free gold and silver kit, you guys. And then our next one, I know we saw the General Flynn ad that I run, which talks about the 5th generation warfare book and the artificial intelligence book. But what you guys may not know is General Flynn has a movie that's coming out. And this is just going to rock everybody's socks. So same link that's down in the description that you use for the books. You can go to generalflynn.com/alpha. It'll take you to this website. You can go in, you can put in your email if you want to subscribe for free to get the notification from General's info. And then right up here where you see General Flynn, you just click on that and it will take you to where you can see the movie trailer. Also, when you subscribe for those updates, as soon as it releases, you're going to be made aware of it. So let's take a look at this trailer, and then we'll get into our show. Here you go, you guys.
President's former National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, pleading guilty today to lying to the FBI.
Flynn knew exactly how the system worked. He knew exactly what the intel world had been up to. He understood its funding. They had to get rid of Flynn.
There was a moment where I just felt like I was drowning. So I'm in there with these other political appointees. They're all supposed to go in there and tell what they believe to be the truth. What they did was they took my assessment and they wanted me to change it. And I was like, I'm not changing it.
He was, by definition, the most dangerous possible person for Donald Trump to hire.
President Obama said, but I do have one specific recommendation. Stay away from Michael Flynn. He's bad news.
Over time, instead of being pounded down below the surface of the ocean, we started to fight. I'm now above the surface.
Deliver the truth no matter the cost. I like the way they ended that trailer. As a matter of fact, I had an amazing conversation with my guest, who you guys know is the Colonel. Not a surprise who's going to be coming on the screen here. And, you know, in that conversation, you know, doing the right thing no matter the consequence. And that is something I've experienced in my life. And I'm pretty sure, if not all of you, the majority of you probably have a story where you knew the consequence of doing the right thing. and you did it anyways. And I think it's a testament to how good you are, how good the American people are. And despite what the media tries to paint for America, despite what the world tries to paint for America, we know that at the root of what makes this country is good Americans, people like you. Why you're here? I want to know the truth. I'm tired of lies. I'm tired of propaganda. I want to know what's really going on. And I think the reason you really want to know what's going on for is not just because you're curious, because you're ready to fight for this country and you want to know how to fight. And to know how to fight, you got to know the truth. So with that, let me bring on the extraordinary Colonel. How are you doing, ma'am?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. You made my day, Colonel. I'll tell you that. Enjoyed the conversation.
Well, it's interesting. I had not seen the trailer for General Flynn's movie. I've heard a lot about the movie, but I had a very similar, not to him, but a similar feeling situation of sitting in a room with 6 general officers as a newly assigned wing commander, as a colonel. And I had made a decision, and there was not, my boss was a 3-star, and the other generals in the room did not agree with my decision. And that was not, you definitely feel like you're drowning. I was at the very beginning of the tour. And for those of you not in the military, if you get assigned command and you do not serve at least 2 of the 3 years, command generally is a 2-year assignment. If you are not there the full 2 years, then it's very apparent in your promotion board to general. And you will never get promoted again. And that's true as a lieutenant colonel when you do your group command. If you're not in that job for 2 years, you will never make another promotion. And there's little subtle things like that that occur that you may not ever be fired, but you will never be promoted again either. So it's a very horrible feeling to have to swim upstream of a downstream waterfall. So I have the utmost respect for him.
Absolutely. One thing I like in that trailer, and then we'll get started on Operation Gladio Part 7, is when he makes a statement that you just referenced. I feel like I was drowning. So this may come as a shock to some people. Alpha obviously loves the gym, but when I go to the gym and I got my headset on, Alpha's not always listening to rock hardcore music. I should be sharing this, but I'm committed already. We're family, all right? We're all family, so I'm just going to share it. If you were to tap into Alpha's headset, a lot of times you're going to hear piano music. You're going to hear very soothing, relaxing music. Now, granted, don't let it fool you. I'm destroying the weights. I want to make that very clear. To me, it's almost like controlled chaos, right? And I also like to hear, motivational type of, talks and statements. And one of my friends that shared with me at the time, that goes to why I'm leading up to this man, he's like a success. What do they call him? Not like a life coach, but that version for businesses, to make a successful business. But he's also a big dude, like dude's yoked, right? Like you don't want to piss him off. And so he takes this one guy out there. They're at the beach. He takes him into the water, waist deep. Then they go a little bit deeper, right? And he's like, how bad do you want to be successful? And, the guy's giving him answers. And so he tells him, turn around and look out into the ocean. And so he does. And he grabs this guy and he puts him underwater and he's holding him underwater. And so the guy is like, he's fighting. He's trying to get up to breathe. He probably thinks, he's like, this guy's going to kill me. I just wanted to be a successful businessman. And so finally he brings him back up and the guy's like, like he's trying to gasp for air. And he brings them back, to where they're waist deep. And he goes, when you want to be as successful, or when you want success as bad as you want it to breathe, that's when you'll be successful. So, and I remember it just always stayed with me. Like you can imagine what it feels like. You're underwater. And he's like, I just want to breathe. I want to breathe. And he was doing anything to breathe. And just to know, well, that's the level of fight and work ethic you better have to be successful. And I think you can translate that into, how bad do we want a free country? How bad does each person watching this episode right now, how bad do you really want to be a free American? How bad do you want your babies and your grandbabies and the lineage to your name? How bad do you want them to grow up in a country that's free? And if you
Right.
don't want that as bad as you want breath to stay alive, then you don't want it bad enough. So with that, Colonel, unless you have a statement on it,
No, I like that. And I like the transition to control chaos as well, because that's control chaos. That's kind of the classic definition of Gladio. So it's a perfect transition.
let's roll.
So one of the things that we come across in our searching through Operation Gladio and trying to scale how big of an operation it is, where it took place at, we come across names. We come across names I've never heard of. And people go, well, that happens all the time. Well, it doesn't when you're very well read or that you've went to school for most of your adult life. There are people who have had tremendous amount of impact in the world. You come across them occasionally, right? In something, it may be just some previous book, they just happen to be mentioned. There's a lot of people in Gladio that you've never heard about. So I was looking up a guy by the name of Mitchell Warbell III. Now, I did an interview last week about him, and that's on my Rumble channel. And I'm not going to talk about him, but I will say this about him. He had a tremendous effect, and he also verified for like the umpteenth time for me, there were Gladio bases in the United States because he owned one. It was outside of Atlanta and outside of Fort Benning, and he was tied to Fort Benning, and he taught pararescue. He is also an arms dealer. He was operating in our backyard. And when I encourage you to go watch that video, because and it might be good to bring him up on with you, Alpha, because I think you would find that all enlightening as well. Just his background, because you can see it in a lot of things that you would have come across in your career, where you see this guy that he may be in this business, but then he has all of these other people around him, and you can put two and two together. So anyway, while I was looking into him, I come across another name, and this guy's name's William Pawley, Pawley. And again, I want to take this opportunity with your audience to explain how someone can be hiding in plain sight. And this guy's life is so expansive and so encompassing of Operation Gladio. When I got done, and I'm not done, but when I got done preparing for this show, I literally was overwhelmed. So we're going to start at the beginning. He was born in the end of the 1800s, 1896. And I find that very interesting because that is at the same time when this whole fascist idea was being birthed over in London, England, that we went over in our first show. So this guy was born in South Carolina. As a matter of fact, anybody that's from South Carolina will recognize Pawley Island because it is a very well-known place in South Carolina. It's named after his family. He was a very, very wealthy businessman. And he also lived for a long time in Cuba. He attended private schools because his dad was in Cuba, obviously. He attended private schools in Havana and also was sent to a military academy in Georgia. In 1927, he got connected with a company called Curtiss Wright. And for anybody in aviation, they're going to recognize that right away because that's an aircraft company. And this is very early on. Obviously, Wright is the Wright brothers in aviation history. It is Curtiss Wright, the company, that will make him a very wealthy man. So in July of 1919, he gets married to someone that he met probably while he was at the academy, because the military academy, because they got married in Georgia. They, within a couple of years, moved to Miami. In 1928, he returns to Cuba. He becomes president of the aviation company that's basically running all aviation in Cuba. Now, you have to understand how big this is, because at this point, Cuba is the mafia headquarters, right, of the South, not Miami, Cuba. And you have all of the people on the initial aviation because they've got lots of money. They're flying in there. They're on vacation. This is huge. So he's hobnobbing with the best. And he's literally the president of this company. He eventually, 4 years later, sells his company to Pan Am. Pan Am did a lot of stuff with the CIA. So this may be kind of the beginning here. Not that he wasn't already associated with the mafia running the Cuban airline, but and keep in mind that this is during the time when Cuba pretty much had installed people from the United States running Cuba so that the mafia could make all their inroads there. So he becomes president of Intercontinental Corporation in New York. He eventually meets Clement Keyes, who was the former president of that Curtiss Wright aircraft company. Polly also owns multiple sugar plantations in Cuba. So when I talk about the international syndicate of these industrialist banker guys, that the CIA runs Operation Gladio as a paramilitary capability for them, Polly's one of them. He will go on to own all of the transportation in Cuba. He owns the a bunch of sugar plantations down there. So he creates the trolley bus and the entire gas system throughout Cuba he owns. So he is like one of the oligarchs of Cuba. You have to understand how big this is. He has
I want to bring something up on the screen real quick. Cool little tool that people can use to kind of aid. Make sure I have the right page here. Their research. It's from its ancestors. Ancestors.familysearch.org, and you can put people's info in there, and it'll give you stuff like, you know, their spouse, children, you know, different things that are going on. But something else that's pretty cool will tell you about different world events that were happening around that time, that person was born, or significant times in their life that'll kind of make the correlation, well, unofficial correlations of things. But just wanted to put that out there. So if you want to look for it, just go to Family Search, and it's ancestors.familysearch.org.
That's a great tool. Also, my husband found one that's called Find a Grave. And it also does that same thing, where you can click on the different hyperlinks in there of the family members and find their family trees.
Very cool.
Yeah. So he has a brother called Eugene, and Eugene eventually joins William in Havana and gets involved in the public transportation system. And at the time, the public transportation system, as I mentioned, because the Cuba mafia has now built out all of the hotels, the casinos, and it's just growing by leaps and bounds. So public transportation is kind of like the thing down there. If you're going to make money and you're not going to actually be in the mafia owning a casino, transportation is huge. So he's got the airline coming in, and he's got all of the local. So he's kind of the Uber guy of Cuba at the time, back in the day. In 1933, Polly moves to Shanghai, China. And you have to understand what's going on in 1933 in China, too, because this is the drug Boxer War period of time where the London crowd had taken over Shanghai. They take over Hong Kong as a result of the Boxer Wars. Those are hotbeds for drugs. Okay, very important. And he becomes president of the China National Aviation Corp. So now he's running the airline between Hong Kong and Shanghai. Think about that. These are both London hubs of drugs. And see, if you don't know Gladio and you don't know what we've already established of the Gladio network, you could read this and it means nothing to you. So what? He opened an airline in China. But if you have the timeline and you have the importance of where the drug nodes are in the Operation Gladio, all of this completely changes everything that you read. So, oh, look, Polly sells out to Pan Am again. Who is connected to the CIA. So now you have a connection of Cuba. And what was Cuba? Cuba was the drug hub into the United States. So now we've captured the two hubs, Shanghai and Hong Kong, and we got the hub in Cuba, and Polly's in charge of it all. So he later creates a aircraft partnership with the Chinese nationalist government under a company called Central Aircraft Manufacturing Company. And it is in Hangzhou, Wuhan. Yeah, same one. And finally, Lowing in the China-Burma border. Now, again, put my Gladio glasses on. You have the Chinese nationalist, excuse me, the Chinese nationalist government is the Chiang Kai-shek guy that becomes the world's biggest drug dealer. And it is Mao that kicks him out of China. But in the process, he's the guy that's growing all the opium and providing all the opium to the world drug dealers out of China. And so the Chinese nationalist government is ran, or their army is the KMT, which is the political party in Taiwan, because he's the one that eventually moves to Taiwan and takes over Taiwan after World War II, right?
Oh,
so here's the world's biggest drug dealer. And this guy, Pauly, goes into partnership with them. And he's flying out of Shanghai and Hong Kong and owns the company in Cuba, and then consolidates them all under Pan Am. Just want to make sure y'all keep up. And when Chiang gets kicked out of China, he goes to Burma. So there's a reason why that other manufacturer place is on the border of China and Burma. So the company's nickname was Camco, C-A-M-C-O. It was owned in a partnership between the Pauly's family and the Chinese nationalist government. And there was a minor interest of the Intercontinental Company, which Pauly basically set up as a holding company to start putting all of these entities that they were collecting under. So as an aside, it's interesting to note that China National Aviation Corporation, which was established to provide air routes between major treaty ports and manage all of the operations of those ports. That would be nice to have if you're in the drug business. So this basically becomes the Chiang's airline, for lack of a better way of saying it. Aviation Exploration, Inc. was a holding company of the U.S. aviation magnate by the name of Clement Melville Keyes, who was at the time the president of Curtiss-Wright. And a few other aviation firms kind of started like a conglomerate, if you will. By 1933, Keyes had retired under a cloud of scandal and near bankruptcy. Thomas Morgan was his successor as head of Curtiss-Wright, which through Across Holdings ultimately controlled both the North American and Intercontinental. After a series of disastrous accidents and disagreements with Chinese leaders, Morgan decided to sell 45% of his stake to Pan Am. That's how Pan Am enters the picture here. Morgan concluded the sale with Pan Am president, who at the time was Juan Trippe, Trippe. Trippe almost immediately put Pan Am Vice President Harold Bixby in charge of the airline's new Eastern operation. Bixby is well known in banking and aviation circles as the man who put up the money for Charles Lindbergh's flight.
Oh, you gotta be kidding me.
I'm not. I'm telling you, this thing is just crazy. The remaining 71 aircraft in Hong Kong were sold to the nationalist, Chiang, the KMT army, who had retreated to the island of Taiwan. So, and they were all registered to Civil Air Transport. That's a CIA company. So, wait a minute. This guy's over in Southeast Asia creating an air force for Chiang that all goes to Taiwan. What? And he's the biggest drug dealer in the world. And he has his own air force now, thanks to this guy. So, after a lengthy legal battle, the planes were delivered by the Hong Kong government to the Civil Air Transport Company in 1952, which is the CIA. In 1940, there's I've never even heard of this, Hindustan, which is a company that was set up in India, and Poly provides all of the initial infrastructure for this company, and it's an aircraft manufacturing company too, that this Curtis Wright company. So he's basically going around building like mini air forces all over this area. So as a pioneer in outsourcing to India, Poly had organized and became president of Hindustan Aircraft Manufacturing Company in India in 1940. Poly's 38 technicians trained 11,500 Indian aircraft workers who later helped with the war effort in supplying planes needed for who? The Flying Tigers. And the Flying Tigers, he basically is supplying the aircraft for them. They go on to be employed by the CIA carrying drugs under the guise of humanitarian airlift. In 1941, with his brothers Edward and Eugene, he was involved in an organization called the First American Volunteer Group, which becomes the Flying Tigers. So he knows all of the Chennaults and all of the CIA that had anything to do with the whole China lobby, which I've talked about extensively in some of our book reviews. So all of the OSS that were in China during World War II, this guy knows them all. So he's into, and this is going to be important later on, he's intimately involved in the CIA. That's kind of the foot stomper. So, and not only did they just have airlift capability, Curtis begins in this area manufacturing the P-40, which is a fighter aircraft. So this guy is building literally an air force, both with cargo aircraft and fighter aircraft for these entities over there, of which the CIA basically has control over, right? So later, when the Allied forces were driven out of Lower Burma by the Japanese, the Camco factory and airfield across the border in Lowing, China, served as a base for this aviation volunteer group, which is the Flying Tigers. During World War II, Eugene Poly was among a group of Americans who escaped internment following the fall of Hong Kong to the Japanese. So they definitely were over there. May 1942, Poly moved his operations to India as a partner in the Hindustan Aircraft Limited. During the 1940s, Eugene Polly's brother, his brother, was actually the OSS desk officer for China in Washington, D.C. at the OSS headquarters.
And ain't nobody's.
How do we not know who this guy is?
Well, how does the government at the time not be like, oh, hold on, like, wait a minute?
Involved in it.
Yep.
They're involved in it. They know what they're doing. We just don't know what they're doing. And keep in mind, this is all, this whole 1940s is when FDR is president. And there are still people out there that think FDR was a good guy. He was not a good guy, guys. In 1950, Eugene moved to Mexico to set up silver mining enterprises with a group of Mexican businessmen. And that's a whole nother story, because there's a lot of the CIA Operation Gladio involved in the silver mining in Mexico, as far as them seeding it with these stay-behind capabilities, many of which blooms into what we now know to be as the cartels. That's another story. 1945, Polly was appointed U.S. ambassador to Peru by Harry Truman. In 1948, he is named ambassador to Brazil, which of course has multiple coups. And Peru actually goes on and has a coup as well. Whether he's seeding the Gladio stay-behind capability at this point, I don't know. But trouble seems to follow this guy around. In December of 1948, there was one of the aircraft that's associated with him that struck a mountain, and in poor visibility, at least that's what we're told, killing all 35 people on board. One of the passengers on board was Quentin Roosevelt, the grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt. And let's see, Quentin Roosevelt served in World War II in France and had attained the rank of major. Quentin, at the time, was the director of the China aircraft manufacturing company that Polly is the president of. So he was on the board of directors. So it's like one of the directors got killed. And we now know that you have to question every aircraft accident.
Every one of them.
Yeah. But it's interesting that he was Teddy Roosevelt's grandson also. 1940s, Polly was an active member of the Republican Party, close personal friend of Dwight Eisenhower, who, as we know, created Operation Gladio after World War II and sanctioned Allen Dulles to run it and build it out, and appointed Allen Dulles as the director of the CIA. And Polly was also a very close personal friend of Allen Dulles. Polly is also known to have taken part in some of Allen Dulles's what's referred to as executive actions, which is basically taking out foreign leaders. In 1949, he goes back to Cuba and starts expanding some of the transportation hubs that he has in Cuba. In 51, he's appointed special assistant to the Secretary of State. In 52, special assistant to the Secretary of Defense. And in 54, he goes back and does another stint as a special assistant to the Secretary of State. And let me explain something to you if you've never been in the military or the government. When you have a special assignment that you don't want to be on your books, you assign somebody the duty title special assistant. So it provides you the capability of paying them and giving them protection of being an employee of the government, but they're not actually assigned to a particular job with a particular responsibility. It's kind of like being a czar, or the job that John Kerry just had. they kind of float around. And when you go back in time in history, it's almost impossible to find them because they're not in any organizational chart. So if you're going to give them a job you don't want to have historically captured, special assistant is how you hide them. In 1954, Polly played a role in an operation called PB Success. It was a CIA plot to overthrow the Guatemalan government of Arbenz, and that was in conjunction with the Chiquita Banana United Fruit CIA front company. Arbenz was the guy that had kicked the Rockefeller board United Fruit out of the country because they had basically taken everybody's land, owned 42% of the property, and used the Guatemalans as slaves and paid zero taxes. So when Arbenz got elected, a democratically elected president, he did land reform and kicked these guys out of the country because they weren't getting any tax revenue from and reallocated the property to the people so that they could make a livelihood for themselves. Well, he was immediately overthrown by our government.
Imagine that.
Yeah, right. And it was a Gladio operation. So the fact that they're saying that Polly played a role, we're establishing kind of his street creds with the Gladio operation crowd. He later attended an Inter-American conference. I love these names. Inter-American Conference for the Maintenance of Continental Peace and Security.
The opposite.
Right? Okay, so that was held in Brazil. He also attended the 9th International Conference of American States in Colombia. And he was later given awards from governments in Peru, Brazil, Dominican Republic, Cuba, and China. And almost every one of those were at the time when a US installed dictator was in charge of the country. Polly served, well, we already talked about Peru and Brazil, but he also spent time in Panama, Guatemala, Cuba, and Nicaragua between 45 and 60. So definitely CIA guy. 1958, special secret emissary to Cuba for Eisenhower that basically was trying to get Batista to not be appeared to be the elected president, but actually establish a junta, which is kind of like a military dictatorship. And supposedly Polly went down there to talk him into doing that on behalf of the US government during Eisenhower's administration. So now we get to some really interesting stuff. In the winter of 1962, we have a guy by the name of Eddie Bayo. His real name was Eduardo Perez. He comes up with this story that there are 2 Russian officers, colonels, that are hiding in Cuba, that they have like defected from the Russian entity, and they went out up into the mountains of Cuba and they're hiding. And there needs to be a mission launched from Miami to go into the mountains of Cuba and rescue these guys. Because they're basically going to tell the US government that Russia, Khrushchev lied to JFK and didn't take all their missiles out. That's the story. So Bayo added that these men wanted to pass the details of these warheads still being there. Bayo, it's interesting to note, fought alongside Raul Castro and was his military aide who was working with the CIA at the time. He conducted missions out of Gitmo. Now, this is very important. Huh?
I was waiting for when we were going to hear the word Gitmo. I was like, there's no way Gitmo's not involved in Operation Gladio. As a matter of fact, this calls for a little applause there. Little applause.
Yeah, I think it would be very interesting. And obviously, I didn't have time for this show to look into the history of Gitmo, because a lot of the operations that went against Cuba, and probably even before that, when they were coupping Cuba to install Batista, potentially was launched out of Gitmo, that area.
It has to be, Colonel.
Okay.
Because you're on the door. You're right there on Cuba's land.
I know. So he conducted, let's see, he was part of a CIA initiative called TEJANA. So is that Tejana?
Yeah.
Okay. So they were gun runners on a U.S. Navy sub chaser that had been decommissioned that supplied weapons to Cubans inside of Cuba against Castro. Now, keep in mind, while we're going through this scenario, you had the CIA supporting both Batista and Castro at the same time. There was a CIA agent that basically was like an aide to Castro, and we just learned there's another guy that was an aide to his brother, right? That's involved with the CIA. So they were on both sides of this war, and the CIA's plan was either one that won, they were taking the island back for the mafia and their drug staging ground, which is what it had been used for. And what we now know from revelations that we've already discovered is that once Castro won, he would not do the bidding of the CIA and the US government. And so therefore he got accused of being a communist and kicked to the curb. And then immediately they begin plotting how to overthrow him. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. There's a whole lot of other stuff to it, but that's it in a nutshell. So now we see that this Bayo guy is involved in some of the overthrow activity that occurred after Castro won the revolution there. So Bayo was also served time in the U.S. Army during World War II. Bayo also used at least one bomb inside the United States while working for the CIA at a house the CIA suspected held a Castro agent in it. He literally went and planted a bomb and blew up like half the house. So anybody that tells you that the CIA doesn't operate in the United States, just laugh at them in their face. Earlier in 1963, Bayo had plans for a regime change in Haiti. Haiti, like the Haiti we talked about already. Duvier, or the guy that was named as Papa Doc, Bayo had actively plotted to overthrow him because the CIA wanted they wanted Haiti to launch anti-Castro raids. Others in Bayo's circle included a guy by the name of Jerry Patrick Hemming, who had Gladio ties of the Dominican Republic time when we overthrew that government. And he also had been working in Haiti. Meanwhile, they all go to New York and they visit a guy by the name of Theodore Rakusin, Racoosin. He had contacts inside of JFK's administration. One of the contacts was a guy by the name of Howard Davis, who was a pilot. And he actually flew anti-Batista rebels, i.e. CIA, into Cuba on different missions. Rakusin was a personal friend of the guy that ran Radio Free Europe, which also was a CIA entity. There were meetings of these people in the office. So they come back from New York and they start having these planning meetings in Miami. Well, it's kind of weird that all of their planning meetings were in news editors' offices. So they meet in Bill Bagg's office, who was the editor of the Miami News. And they also meet in an office of Jack Gore, Gore, in Fort Lauderdale. And at that meeting, there's a Florida congressman whose last name was Kramer attending the planning meeting. So there was a whole bunch of other people there, all of Watergate fame and CIA, like E. Howard Hunt and all of those guys. So definitely all CIA. I just thought it was hilarious. They're meeting in newspapers, editors' offices. So there, I have a whole bunch of names. I'm not going to run through them because it just gets kind of in the way, but just know that Frank Sturgis and some of the people that we know, Howard Hunt, are all in this cell together. So Polly gets approached to ask him to help fund a mission because the CIA is kind of leery about the people involved. And, you know, when they're leery, you probably need to stand back. But they approach Polly to do it. And then eventually Ted Shackley, who's in Miami at the time, he gives the okay for the CIA to be involved in supposedly this rescue mission of these two Russians. And the reason why they all wanted to do it is because they all wanted to embarrass JFK. They still all blamed him for the Bay of Pigs, even though it was their stupid idea. But they blame him for the fiasco that it became. And they want to pull these two Russian guys out of Cuba to say, see, he lied to you. They're still there. They still have missiles there. And so they all get fixated on this being a true story. So it was almost kind of like a soft coup, if you will. They're setting JFK up and they're looking for the dirt to do it. So this mission gets dubbed Operation Red Cross, which I think is totally a good name. So William Polly.
Just shooting from the hip here, you guys, just so people can think. There was a time during a portion of COVID that there was two ships, one on the West Coast and one on the East Coast, all white, that had crosses on them, that were there to, you know, supplement, hospital beds. And those were, quote unquote, Red Cross ships. And there's been a lot of theories off those that they weren't hospital ships, that those were ocean prisons that were collecting people. I've never had a chance to look into it. Hopefully someone in the audience can shoot some links or info that they found.
It's interesting that even if it wasn't prison ships, pre-staging capability in case you need it is exactly what the CIA does in whatever capacity is needed. So it is not unrealistic to think that there were things in there for contingencies, none of which would have been in our favor. I'll just say it that way. So as I stated earlier, William Polly contacts Ted Shackley. Shackley is at this point in charge of JM Wave, which was the organization that we talked about that was kind of the anti-Castro Cubans. And I've now done enough research to confidently say that all of the exile Cubans that is referred to in all of the literature in the United States were Gladio cell trained people. They were all trained assassins. They all had training in explosives. They are, if you would just cross out the name anytime you see exile Cuban and say stay behind unit, they are exactly the same thing. So Ted Shackley was in charge of JM Wave, which is the entity that organized and recruited and trained the exile Cuban / Gladio cell in South Florida. Shackley decided to help Polly organize this entity, and the actual voyage over there had a sub name called Operation Tilt, T-I-L-T, because they were going to tilt the scales so that JFK did not win re-election in 1964. And when this failed, they went to option B, which we all know what that was. This Bayo Polly mission was assigned to a guy by the name of Rip Robertson, R.I.P. And he also was in the CIA and in Miami. There was another guy that was associated with it by the name of David Sanchez Morales, just in case you come across those names later. And as a side note, I found this very interesting. In 1963, around the same time, singer Frank Sinatra sponsored a mafia guy mob guy, Roselli, Roselli, for membership into an exclusive Los Angeles club by the name of Friars Club. Now, Friars Club is very interesting because if you go back to Gladio history, the friar's robe was used in the Masonic Lodge in Italy during the beginning of the propaganda duo, which is the Masonic Lodge that was kind of the backbone of their Operation Gladio in Italy. And one of the guys that basically was doing all the money laundering for him was a guy by the last name of Calvi. He ends up on Friars Bridge in London, hung with Masonic rocks in his pocket because he was about to spill his guts. So again, when you understand Gladio and you go through this whole history, all of these little things you'd read right over Friars Club and think nothing about it. But it all has meaning. So after Roselli gets accepted into the Friars Club, Roselli discovers this card cheating operation going on by one of his friends in Las Vegas, a guy by the name of Maurice Friedman. And he basically tries to blackmail him into getting his cut of the cheat that's going on.
You want to see something? Let me show you something real quick, because I love looking up things while you're talking, because I like, to find photos, and then I put the links for the people. But when I was looking up Friars Club while you're talking about it, and let me bring up this image. And this image says, publicly photoed for the 1968 roast of Johnny Carson, Dick Caviedt, and Alan King are ready to start the honors. But this is attached to the Friars Club. And you got apples that are on the dish and a severed head of a really popular person. It just, are those like friars coats that they're wearing? It's hard to tell, but
yes, it is.
Yeah,
that's what they're wearing. So that's a very interesting picture. Yeah. And that is where they hosted a lot of those roasts. So they're basically roasting that night. They would have been roasting Johnny Carson. So there are other pictures of people like that where their head sticking up from that table, because that was kind of a almost like a honor to be roasted by them. That's what you're looking at.
Symbolism. It's just
very much symbolism. Okay, so basically the FBI agents are tracking Roselli in this whole card cheat thing. So there's scores of wealthy men, including millionaire Harry Carl, who was the husband of Debbie Reynolds, and actor Zeppo Marx. They were milked out of millions of dollars as a result of this scam. Grant Cooper represented some of the defendants in the case, including Roselli. Roselli was eventually convicted and fined $55,000 during the trial. Secret grand jury transcripts were discovered on the defense's table. Cooper eventually pleaded guilty to contempt for possessing the documents. And INS eventually goes on to try to deport Roselli, but they fail. So this is a den of thieves, and it goes across all. And it's not surprising to rope in all of Hollywood, because we know they're all part of the CIA apparatus for the propaganda deal. So still in the summer of 1963, this small group of people, to include that Rip Robinson, Polly Bayo, all of them, they get together with, and I find this interesting because every one of these missions that have the media is like Life magazine. And Life magazine is very important because the guy that owned Life magazine, LUCE, is part of the CIA. His wife, Claire Luce, is the ambassador to Italy when they set up Operation Gladio there. So it's interesting. And of course, Life magazine is where they took the Zapruder tape of JFK's murder and hid it. So again, they go to Life magazine and say, hey, give us a journalist and a photographer to go on this mission because we're going to embarrass JFK and get him fired. So who do they call? Not Ghostbusters. They call Life magazine. They fly down a crew to go on Polly's yacht to go drop off these people that are going to go on to Cuba, go get these 2 Russians and bring them back to embarrass JFK. Well, of course, they do this on Polly's yacht, and they're never seen from or heard of again. So not Polly, the people that they launched to go on this suicide mission. They all get killed. So in 1963, again, still summer, John Martino told a fascinating story that he attended a meeting in Palm Beach at which a Cuban who used the name De Guerrero, which is bio, by the way, claimed that the Soviets had deceived President Kennedy. And he goes on and tells this entire same story, just kind of as a verification that all of this stuff was true and real. And he witnessed one of the planning meetings for it. And he talks about them having a rendezvous point in the Bahamas. He also added that that the CIA was leery about the whole thing because, and there was like the sense of urgency that it had to happen right away. So I already mentioned, let's see, Polly told Shackley that he had gotten a call from the chief counsel of the Senate Intel Subcommittee, Jay Sourwine, promising that the chairman, James Eastland from Mississippi, would launch hearings if the Soviet officers could be found. So you have the Senate plotting with the CIA to set up the president. Okay, that's an explanation point. It's just hard to even believe all of this crap.
Sounds like a freaking Roman play.
Yes. So Shackley kind of wanted to do it because he wanted to help out one of his former bosses who had got crosswise with the CIA and was basically going to give him the credit for it. The guy that had gotten crosswise was Bill Harvey, and that's a whole nother long story I won't go into. But so anyway, on June 4th, the day before the mission was launched, Martino and Bayo told an astounded Polly that they had agreed to let the Life magazine crew come on, and Life magazine had paid them $15,000 to be the ones that did it. So Lauren Hall, who is a Trafficani associate, and Trafficani is the drug kingpin from Tampa that operates out of Miami. Lauren Hall was later investigated for his contact with Oswald in Dallas, and it was him that claimed that the mafia, not Life, had in fact put up the $15,000. So this is them dirtying up the Cubans to blame them for JFK's assassination. On June 5th, Polly's yacht. What do you think the name of his yacht is? Flying Tigers 2.
Shocker. That you know, just overconfident that they're just never going to get caught.
Who names their yacht, a boat, Flying Tigers, after your drug airline? What else did he use his yacht for? Okay.
And then it's going to Cuba.
I'm telling you, when I read this, I need to have a camera on me while I'm doing the research. I'm constantly doing this. So he tows the smaller craft out off the coast of Cuba. Everybody gets loaded up on it. They launch them And like I told you, we never see them again. So the mission fit nicely with Roselli's later claim that President JFK was assassinated by an anti-Castro sniper team sent in to murder Castro, captured by the Cubans, tortured, and then redeployed to Dallas. So that story is basically this story. We've all heard that story. We all heard that it was basically the mafia that says there was a hit team that was deployed into Cuba, that it was then redeployed to hit JFK. This is it. This is the story. This is Polly's team. The problem with the story is Polly's team was never seen again. They were not redeployed.
So what does your speculation think? Do you think that there was good guy ops that got wind of this and then did the hit on the actual hit team? Do you think Cuba got a hold of these guys? And okay.
This is like probably the 20th or maybe 22nd assassination attempt on Castro at this point. They run poison at him. And multiple poisons. The guy Gottlieb created special poisons, a poison in a toothpaste. They did everything. They pulled out all the stops to try to assassinate Castro. They wanted this island back so freaking bad. Now, and another thing from another episode that I found, and not necessarily one we've covered, there is, and around the same time, an oil field found off of the coast of Cuba. And the name of the oil field was Zapata. Within a year's time of the discovery of this oil field, Bush Sr. creates Zapata Oil in Texas. So that may lead credence as to why they wanted Cuba back, not just as a drug hub, but for the oil as well. Because remember, all of this is done for the international syndicate. It's not done just to do. It's done because they want something and it's going to make them richer. You got to keep that in the back of your mind. So, let's see. Basically, I put a couple of things about them vanishing, but there's not a lot of information that I have found about what other than the hypothesis that they were yet another group that had been captured by Castro. Because, again, this was not the first even manned attempt to murder Castro. And they kept finding out about them and killing the people that were trying to do it.
Do you think it's possible that Castro, catching these guys, thought that it was probably a complete involved government operation to take them out, and maybe put some of the onus on that on JFK as well?
So obviously that's a possibility. I don't think it's likely. Only from this perspective. The intel community seems to be a very fluid community. And Castro had his own spies in Miami, which is how he was allowed to thwart a lot of the attempted assassinations. So he had infiltrated the Cuban exile group, if you will. So I think if their problem with JFK was he was willing to talk to anybody. JFK had talked to Castro.
God, that sounds mighty familiar.
Yeah, exactly. JFK had worked the deal with Khrushchev, basically allowing him to remove the missiles and no harm, no foul. That's what pisses these people off, because all of this in some way was being used by them to control people. You end up imagine, my brain just goes bonkers. So it seems like the international community, with JFK's stance with Charles de Gaulle and giving the freedom back to Algeria, and JFK's approach with Lumumba and all of the rest of them, JFK, everybody knew, was an honest dealer. And so I don't believe that any head of state, as a matter of fact, some people hated him for him being an honest dealer and willing to talk to the Soviets and anybody else they labeled as communist that weren't really actually communists. So that's why I don't add a lot of credence to that.
Yeah, it sounds like it's more of a probability that Castro and JFK had a probably more of a direct connect to get information to each other, because Castro's probably telling JFK, listen, they ain't just trying to kill me, brother. Like, they ain't too happy with you either.
Yeah.
And it just sounds, it's like freaking, I hate to say it, it's like Hollywood. It's like a movie script of like having these leaders of these countries having to have some covert intel within the intel community, because the intel community isn't for the actual protection of these countries or these leaders. It's because they really belong to this huge international crime syndicate that's Gladio.
Exactly.
And you have these intel force. It's just wild. I mean, it's almost even like, who did Trump talk with? You know, with Putin and Xi.
And they went ballistic.
Yes.
It's the exact same thing.
Because he's sidestepping these agencies that really just belong to Gladio. And it's like, no, you're not going to know what we're doing, and you're not going to know what we're planning. But we're going to do these symbolisms, like, you know, Putin handing off a soccer ball, you know, to Trump, you know, certain Middle Eastern leaders handing off a sword to an American president. That's never been done before. It's almost like Trump orchestrates these iconic moves so that these other world leaders see that these other world leaders are, hey, we're in the loop with you guys, and we don't trust MI5 and MI6 and the Five Eyes in Mossad. It's just like,
and Trump came right out and said he does not believe anything the CIA says. He said that out loud. Now you know why.
So then, you know what? It just, God, you make my brain just go like spider web out. So then it's one of those things that people just have to consider. You know, I know the optics of what, you know, we see that the movie trailer all the way back to the beginning of this podcast with General Flynn.
Yep.
And Obama telling Trump,
yes,
you know, stay away from Michael Flynn. Why, Obama? Right. And then, you know, everybody said, well, you know, Trump fired Flynn, you know, from the NSA, you know, within 30 days. So he took that job away from him, from agencies that he doesn't trust. But he makes a statement, you know, a few months ago where he literally, Trump phone calls General Flynn on stage at an Awaken tour and says, be ready, General, and stay healthy, because we're going to need you. Does that sound like these men don't talk or work together? It's like he put Flynn in the NSA long enough to get the information. And this is all speculation. I want to make sure.
National Security Council, though, not the NSA.
National Security Council. Thank you. He puts them there, you know, for 30 days, you know, long enough to get the information that he needs to get. And it's, man, there's a lot going on.
Okay, so Rip Robinson, who's an integral part of this whole Castro Soviet spy kind of episode, he actually goes back to work for the CIA officially. And so there's records of him actually being associated with the CIA as well. And he was associated with the Bay of Pigs and the frogmen getting on the beach and that type of thing. He's also associated with the JM Wave operation in Miami. And let's see. Robinson died in 1970, supposedly after he contracted a disease from the time that he was in Vietnam. But the timing of this, and we'll go on with a couple of the other ones, adds kind of a question mark to that. And then I've already mentioned the part about the live team being involved in it, and them also having the Zapruder tape. And also, I forgot to mention, Life magazine also bought Marina Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald's wife's story rights, and never did anything with them. So they definitely were helping out. Also, the guy Dick Billings, who works at Life magazine, he was hired by Robert Blakely, the second head of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, as the editorial director of the final report of the House Select Committee on Assassinations.
And people want to know, why don't we ever learn? Because they run the people that are supposed to do the investigating. It's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. JFK was assassinated a few months later. Meanwhile, it's interesting to note the CIA had leaked the Bay of Pigs information to a man by the name of Hal Hendricks. You know, you can give classified information to a reporter unless you're not the CIA, and then you're Julian Assange and you end up in jail, or any of the other reporters. So Hal Hendricks, that leak was to expose the exposure of classified material to the public. Senator Kenneth Keating, a Republican from New York, was also fed classified information to leak as well. And the reason why they were leaking this information is it was all about the whole Khrushchev deal with Kennedy. So the CIA began leaking this information to piss off the Cuban exile group / Gladio people, to give them an impetus to start helping and formulating these cells to go and attack Cuba, to basically try to they're just spurring chaos. That's basically the bottom line. And Life magazine was at the heart of it. So one of the first leads that a guy that was looking into the whole assassination thing was given was none other than Claire Luce of Time magazine, her husband owned. So of course she's read in on all of this, because like I told you, she actually set up Gladio, or helped she's the one that funneled the $5 million to ruin the election in the 1940s in Italy and swing it towards the guy that would put him in NATO. That's who she is. She's also one of the wealthiest women in the world. And she, let's see, she was a former member of the U.S. House, of course, because they're crooks too. She did playwrights, so she was a big thing in Hollywood. And she leads this guy on a goose chase, which he doesn't know because he thinks she's legit. And so she sends him to check out all of these different leads, and she's blaming all these people, the whole Bay of Pigs thing. And so Luce says that sometime after the Bay of Pigs, she received a phone call from her great friend, William Pauley, who lived in Miami. Very rich guy, flying tigers, General Claire Chennault, blah, blah, blah. And she reads him all of his resume. And so now the guy thinks she's really legit. And so basically she participates in the whole shaping of a narrative to go along with the JFK assassination, that it was the Cuban exile group, and how all of the stuff that happened as relating to that, and how JFK pissed off this whole community, which would have then kind of justified his assassination, at least in their um, eyes. So that's kind of what her role in the whole thing was, is she's the one that dirtied them all up. She also kind of fingers Oswald. She has some things to say about him and how he was associated with it. So she's an instrumental figure in the whole forming of the narrative for the CIA. In an author that I was reading says this: in December of 1976, when I was about to start working for the Assassination Committee, I stumbled across some fascinating facts related to Claire Luce's tip to Senator Schweiker, who was on that committee. That was when I learned, for instance, that our great friend in Miami, William Pauly, was a longtime associate of the CIA. Never an official spook, Pauly was nonetheless a member of the Good Old Boys network and was especially close to CIA Allen Dulles. He had helped transform his Flying Tigers into one of the CIA proprietary airlines' civilian air transport, and had set up the agency a front called the Pacific Corporation, which was an offshoot of the Flying Tigers. He had been involved in the CIA's overthrow of Arbenz government in Guatemala. He had backed more than one of the Castro assassination attempts. But Pauly was not just a backer of exile groups. He wanted to be a participant. And I came across a bizarre story about one of his secret excursions into Cuba. And that secret excursion was him using his Flying Tiger yacht to take that group. And what he refers to as CIA paramilitary operatives, that sounds familiar, and a cache of heavy arms and explosives. Dang, that sounds like a mobile Gladio unit. The yacht was scheduled to rendezvous off the coast, and we've went through this. So basically, this is just another reiteration of that same story. So Life Magazine's Miami Bureau, the Richard Billings guy that basically was on the yacht with them, and his photographer, he goes on and talks about that. So this is just a second confirmation that all of this stuff happened. A major press conference would then proclaim what had happened, and that the Soviet Union had stabbed JFK in the back, and JFK didn't know what he was doing and should have never believed him to begin with. So one of Pauly's brothers in 1964, so this is post-assassination, Eugene, he's living in Belglade, Florida. He's the vice president of this Talisman Sugar at the time when William took over the company. So they still have their sugar plantations in Cuba. They eventually sell it because the whole taking over of much of that stuff by Castro. In the early 1970s, Eugene, after he's out of the sugar business, he moves to Graham, Texas, and he founded Pacific Oil Company, which would have put the Paulys in bed with the Bushes. Okay. January of 1977, many Americans were coping with one of the worst winters in the U.S., and an 80-year-old Miami Beach resident whose fortune had been made off the refugees from the cold composed a note in his Sunset Island home. He lifted a pistol to his chest and supposedly shot himself in the heart. That was Pauly. So apparently, Pauly decided he's going to commit suicide at the end of all of this.
Because a man like that commits suicide.
Correct. He was still alive when the ambulance arrived, but died a short time later. I'm sure he did. According to the Miami police, who told the reporters, William Pauly had been in failing health. His death came as, and this is another twist, Frank Sinatra, who, keep in mind, in the days, he was the #1 performer in Cuba for the mob. Frank Sinatra was. That's why he keeps getting woven into the story.
Friars Club, Frank Sinatra, just in case you joined late.
Yeah. His death came as Frank Sinatra fans mourned the death of his mother, Dolly Sinatra, in a plane crash that also claimed the life of her close friend from New Jersey, Anne Carboni, coincidentally, the wife of the former China National Aviation Corporation.
The cleanup
Polly.
duty on all of Polly's linkage.
Clean up on aisle 5. That night, the national broadcast of CBS News devoted less than half a minute to reporting William Polly's death. A former ambassador to Brazil had committed suicide. The Washington Post 2 days later referred to him as an aviation expert and devoted 309 words to his life. The New York Post announced Flying Tiger's founder dies and noted that Polly had raised $250,000 for the election of Eisenhower in 52 and 56, and another $100,000 for Vice President Nixon against JFK. Time magazine noted that William Polly's passing in its customary inch of coverage that stated that 1958 President Eisenhower had dispatched Polly to Cuba on a secret mission to persuade Batista to be that a caretaker government would be installed to prevent revolutions in the future. Batista refused to step down, and 3 weeks later, Fidel Castro took over, which is a very interesting tidbit. The underpinnings of an aftermath of the incident would lead to animosity between Polly State Department members and JFK, as we've outlined extensively. Polly's life in the world as a world financier, envoy, and philanthropic person merited 15 inches in the New York Times. Down in South Carolina, where an island is named after the Polly family, the Florence Morning News obituary pointed out that General James Doolittle had once served as a test pilot for Polly when he sold planes in China. Now, what's interesting about that is we're going to get to Doolittle being in charge of a committee. Why don't you pull that up?
No, not Doolittle.
Yes, yes. Pull up Doolittle's commission.
Okay. Oh, man.
I'm telling you. Florence Morning News said, quote, Havana, Cuba that Polly had moved to Havana, Cuba in 1949 to found a bus company, but returned to Washington in 1951. After retiring, he served on the board of George C. Mitchell Research Foundation, the U.S. Strategic Command Headquarters, the Eisenhower Presidential Library Commission, and Boys Club of America. The U.S. STRATCOM in Nebraska trained Air Force pilots for Doomsday's compact missions. The introduction to Polly's autobiography was completed by his friend, General Bruce Holloway. General Bruce Holloway was actually a commander of STRATCOM, SAC at the time. Holloway's career took him from flying prop fighter planes against the Japanese in World War II to overseeing, during the first term of the Nixon administration, SATCOM's nuclear strike force, which basically was in charge of the intercontinental ballistic missiles and jet bombers. Holloway's responsibilities included listing potential nuclear targets and determining what weapons should be used against them. His early training in such matters was gained during the Cuban crisis when he was deputy commander at U.S. Strike Command in Tampa, Florida, which is now CENTCOM. Holloway and Polly had an early common bond that predated the threat of communism in the Caribbean. From January to July 1942, Holloway was in China with the Flying Tigers while they were under the contract to the Chiang Kai-shek government and the KMT, the drug runners. Prior to being absorbed in the U.S. 14th Air Force, Holloway outlived Polly by more than 2 decades. So Polly was survived by his wife, and he has 2 wives, and he had several kids. Of note to those was one of his nieces served as his longtime secretary and basically had all of the notes of him being associated with all of these CIA agents. So she miraculously lived until her 100th birthday. Let's
That's
see.
interesting. She's like a walking kill switch.
Yeah. Anita grew up, and here's another part of the thing that was interesting about her. She grew up in Haiti. Yeah. So during the period of U.S. occupation, she was born there while our U.S. Marines were there occupying Haiti. And she grew up while the Marines were running Haiti. And let's see. William also employed her sister because Polly would go on to set up the Miami Transit Company that basically ran the transit line in Miami. And let me explain to you why this is so fascinating. Because we found with the Awan brothers that they owned a used car sales because it gives you the ability to provide transportation with no record. So when anybody flew in that was going to be part of the CIA Awan connection, they would go to the used car lot that the Awan brothers ran. They also had a whole bunch of rental property and they stayed there. They were like safe houses. And so having those kinds of capabilities in these areas is critical. So now Polly is intimately involved in the Miami transit system, and also when they were using Cuba in that transit system. So you can have people moving around on these transit entities with no record of them being there.
Like Ghost.
That exactly. So it's also interesting that they both of these two nieces of his were involved in the art world, which is the perfect money laundering cover. And not Anita, that was the personal secretary, but her sister Marcia worked at Pan Am.
You know why this resonates very uncomfortably with me, Colonel? Because if I listen to this stuff because of its relevance to the operations that are still being conducted today.
Correct.
And when you go back to January 6th and you see people showing videos of busloads of people being bussed in, control of transit.
Bingo.
You look at our
Bingo.
southern border. How are they getting these people to all the different states? The buses and transits. And now we're even hearing that airplanes and flights are being used. And how many of these flights probably have a connection or fall under the umbrella agency of Pan Am or some connection to Pan Am? It's like they haven't shifted control of the transit to move your operatives. And it's happening right now in real time in our country.
Correct. That's why Operation Gladio at its heart fascinates me to no end, because if you understand what they did, you understand what they're doing. Okay. So
it brings me to a point, and I don't know if I won't say his name because I don't know if he wants me to say his name, but a good buddy of mine, someone that I trust, who's in the industry and understands these things. And when we talk about crypto, or even like Bitcoin, one of his things is, yes, they talk about all this stuff in the pathway and why it's so secure. He goes, but their vulnerabilities are at both ends, because at both ends, I believe he says it's only 32-bit encryption. So even though the path might have all this technology to it when it comes to crypto, at its starting point and end point is a vulnerability. And I say that because even though they control the transits, and we might not have the ability to look at, manifestos, or passenger list or whatever these things are, if we can have people with their Gladio glasses on and can see these buses leaving and document that, and then communicate that in real time, so where someone can see that identical bus, whether it's a license plate or a transit number, and see where it lands, then yeah, they may control what's on there. But if we can document where it starts and where it ends, and we can do this on a large enough scale and as close to real time as we can, we can start putting correlations to events that transpire with that stuff, and then start holding these people accountable.
Okay, I agree 100%. So it's also interesting to note that 7 months after William dies, his brother in Graham, Texas dies as well, Eugene. So, let's see. And Wallace Polly, who is another brother, he eventually worked for William out of the, he was their New York guy. So he worked out of Rockefeller Center in New York City. Later, he became this is in the You Can't Believe It story. He became a U.S. Coast Guard Reserve pilot. And guess who happened to be flying over the Flying Tiger II when it was doing its Operation Tilt? Yeah, his brother under the Coast Guard. So supposedly stress causes old age shingles. And that's what the ailment that Polly supposedly had, and it had spread all over his body, and he was in agonizing pain. But what's interesting about the timing is, as Watergate's hearings focused attention on the Cuban exiles, he had helped organize and use during the Tilt and Oswald cover-up. By the time a guy by the name of Gayton Fonzie wanted him to testify before the House Senate Select Committee on Assassinations, the shingles had just gotten too painful for him to live anymore.
How convenient for the people that would have been implicated.
How convenient. So in 1975, Polly was interviewed by Soldier of Fortune magazine for a spring of 1976 article about the Bayo Polly affair, that Operation Tilt. Gayton Fonzie, the investigator for the 1975 Church Committee and the 1977 House Select Committee on Assassinations, wrote in his 1993 book, quote, I sent to Washington a list of witnesses I plan to interview and notify those I thought should testify under oath. William Polly was near the top of that list, unquote. When I spoke to him by phone, not me, this is from the author, after the reading of the report, Fonzie told me Polly was the first person he would have called to testify. Polly's animosity towards Kennedy had never subsided throughout his entire life. When he worked with Richard Tryon on a book called Why the Communists Are Winning, as of 1976, the manuscript included his sentiments about the slain commander-in-chief, whom he wished Admiral Arleigh Burke had mutinied against along with himself. And that's talking about the Bay of Pigs. That's the admiral that was in charge. So he basically said out loud that he and the admiral should have disregarded Kennedy's instructions and basically said, sir, I didn't get the message in time. That was the quote. So it's also Gayton Fonzie, the investigator for the Church Committee, also revealed that during his questioning of Claire Booth Luce, she simply smiled sweetly. Then when he asked why, quote, she had concocted the name of Julio Fernandez, unquote, when she called CIA Director Colby with her tale linking Oswald de Castro, quote, I also discovered that Claire Luce was on the board of directors of the Association of Former Intel Officers, formed in 1975, unquote. Claire Luce lived well into the next decade. Her sources for claims about Oswald being pro-Castro were never substantiated. In September 1976, a document revealed that Polly was verbally advised that the proposed interview by the FBI would concern knowledge he might have concerning Cubans coming into this country at a time in the past for the purpose of carrying out a plot to kill JFK in retaliation for alleged plots on the part of the CIA against Cuban Premier Castro. He was further advised that this inquiry was being conducted pursuant to an obstruction of justice inquiry into the causes for which John Roselli, that's the mob guy, had been recently murdered and his body found in Dade County, Florida. Roselli worked for the CIA and was involved in the attempts to assassinate Castro. He was part of the Chicago mob, and pull up his picture and tell me who you think he looks like on Wikipedia. Roselli's real name is Filippo Socco. He's from Italy, in between of Rome and Naples. He lived in LA from 1924, and he basically was involved in bootleg liquor at the time. Al Capone moved him back to Chicago. Roselli was friends with Harry Cohn. Roselli was also indicted for racketeering with unions. He was kicked out of the army and convicted of extortion, working with movie studios. He moves to Las Vegas. There's documents that show that he was recruited into the CIA and that he had associations with an ex-FBI agent, Robert Mahau, and he was an aide to Howard Hughes in Las Vegas. So Roselli was supposedly working as a representative of international corporations that wanted Castro dead due to the gambling losses. That international corporation, of course, was the mob. Roselli also had dealings with Sam Giancana and Santo Trafficano. Santo Trafficano was the Tampa guy that had the Miami market. And he was part of the plot to provide 6 poison pills from the CIA into Castro to some woman that prepared his food to poison him. That was another one of the many attempts. So who does Roselli look like to you?
Looks like Roger Stone.
He looks just like Roger Stone.
Oh, you know what? I apologize, everybody. Let me bring this on the screen.
He looks just like Roger Stone.
What I'm seeing. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
As soon as I pulled that up, I'm like, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. Yeah, he does. Roselli testified in 1975 to the Senate Select Committee on Intel with Frank Church about the CIA's plan to kill Castro, called Operation Mongoose. Shortly before Roselli testified, an unknown person shot and killed Giancana in the basement of his Illinois home. This happened just days before Giancana was to testify as well. Giancana's murder supposedly prompted Roselli to permanently leave LA and Las Vegas for Miami. Roselli was called before the committee to testify about the conspiracy to kill President Kennedy. 3 months after his first round of testimony on the Kennedy assassination, the committee wanted to recall him. However, he went missing. On August 3rd, Senator Howard Baker, who is dirty as they come, a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, requested that the FBI investigate Roselli's disappearance. 10 days later, his decomposing body was found by a fisherman in a 55-gallon steel drum floating in this. I laugh every time I say this. Dumbfoundling Bay near Miami. It's literally D-U-M Foundling. Dumbfoundling Bay.
Jeez. Oh, it sounds like
I haven't even heard of the place. But anyway, so Roselli's dead. So they've mopped up everybody as far as killing anybody that's going to have any ability to refute the lie that the Cuban exile / Gladio people in Miami were involved in the death of JFK. So this is another how convenient. After Roselli's death, journalist Jack Anderson, who we know is CIA, and Les Witten published an editorial stating that Roselli had told associates that individuals he had been recruited. He told individuals that he had been recruited to kill Castro, but had been turned by the Castro leader to assassinate JFK instead. Sure, Jack. We don't believe you. And anytime the CIA obviously wants something printed, Jack Anderson was one of their go-to people. So obviously we talked about the reason why Polly didn't like JFK. And this is very interesting because this is one of the things that he says. Polly stated that he personally had no knowledge whatsoever, nor had he heard any rumors concerning individuals coming to this country from Cuba or any other location with the purpose of carrying out a plot against President Kennedy. He noted that he had many Cuban friends, blah, blah, blah. But you know what he doesn't say? He doesn't talk about any of the people that were already here. He says no one came from Cuba. Well, there was a crap load of Cuban exiles already here. And not that one of two of them weren't involved in that, because they may have been. I just know unequivocally that 2 of the French OAS Gladio troops were deployed by Otto Skorzeny that were on the grassy knoll that day. So could there have been some from the Cuban exile / Gladio unit here in the US? Absolutely. But they were definitely ones from the OAS at the beck and call of Otto Skorzeny there. So anyway, here's another funny. So Polly's first wife was the mother of his son, William D. Polly Jr. He was very good looking, movie star, good looks, and he was actually engaged to 17-year-old Elizabeth Taylor. Right? So William Jr. had cooperated with Anthony Carosa on the writing of the biography of his father and passed away a few months after its March 2012 publication. William was also in the oil business in Texas. So another very interesting tidbit, we're almost at the end, was Clifton Polly Jr., which is William Polly's grandson, was gunned down in his driveway in Coral Gables, Florida in April of 1996. So another assassination. And I mean, this is like in the most exclusive neighborhood. So they tried to say, oh, there's just a lot of crime going on down here in Dade County. But this was like one of the highest cost of living areas in the Miami area. It was next to the Riviera. It was part of the Riviera Country Club. So this wasn't random hoodlums running through the neighborhoods, gunning down people in front of their mansions, or in front of their shacks, because he lived in a mansion. So, and that murder was never solved either.
Of course not.
Of course not. His second wife, Edna Polly, lived in their mansion and passed away at 98 until in 2004. They lived, his mansion that he'd lived on for like 60 years was on a island called Sunset Island. And if you look at that, you can kind of get an idea of how they lived. They were like multi-millionaires. It was only the Miami Herald who truly recognized Polly's importance in the world and made his suicide a front page, almost full page article called "The Swashbuckler in Gray Flannel Suit, Arch Conservative Left His Mark Around the World," which detailed Polly's extraordinary life and his willingness to personally pay for Fidel Castro's assassination. His quote when he was looking for somebody to kill Castro: "Find me one man, just one man who can go do it alone and get Castro. I'll pay anything, almost anything." He then retracted that statement 2 days later and says, "I've talked to someone myself and they're all double dealers these days." So he just put it right out there. He was willing to pay anybody anything to kill Castro. So Polly's suicide eliminated any questioning of him about Operation Tent, Loose, the Cuban exiles' interaction with Oswald, the assassination plots against other foreign leaders. Because keep in mind, this is the guy that was involved in Operation Condor in South America during many of the very early assassinations and installation of dictators in both the Caribbean area, Latin America, and South America. This guy was an all around, and not to mention that, but the whole drug dealing in Southeast Asia, right? He had ties to everything, the oil industry through his brother in Texas. And there was lots of ties to Dallas, which his brother lived just outside of Dallas, in the oil industry. And we have correlated a lot of the oil money being behind paying for a lot of the behind the scenes operators in Dallas, Texas, the day JFK was murdered. So the House Select Committee on Assassination staff members Elizabeth Palmer, Patricia Orr, Jonathan Blackmer, and William Triplett met the liaison at a place called Agency Headquarters to review sanitized material in the Bayo Poly action. That's where he took his own yacht down there and dropped those people off. And they said that they were still classified, that no one could see them. The coverage of Polly's death failed to note that he had not only been one of the wealthiest men of his era, but had been among the most powerful men in the nation. As a member of the Doolittle Committee reviewing the effectiveness of the CIA.
Heartbreaking.
Doolittle worked for him when he was in aircraft manufacturing an air fleet for the CIA in Southeast Asia for drugs. And Polly had been placed on the Doolittle Committee. And what were they studying? The CIA.
All the movies with Doolittle just got rug pulled from me. No longer a good guy hero.
So 8 months after Polly's death, Senator Frank Church asserted that the Doolittle Special Studies Group report created the atmosphere in which the CIA found it acceptable to violate rights of U.S. citizens by opening people's mail, breaking into homes, interfering with constitutional rights of freedom of assembly, compiling derogatory information on critics, and plotting to overthrow foreign governments, as well as assassinating world leaders. That's what the result of the Doolittle Committee did. During World War II, Senator Church had been a U.S. Army intel officer in China who became disgusted with the corruption around Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist, which probably did not set well with either Chiang Kai-shek or Polly, because Polly was involved in it. 10 months after William Polly took his life, it says that he called... he had kept in contact with Hadley and Doolittle, but was shocked to hear that Polly had taken his own life. Quote, "I will call Doolittle's wife about it," his friend was saying. "When I called him, there was like some rambling, and he basically said, hey, I'm 83 years old now. I don't remember anything. And they all end up shortly after that dead. So let's see. Yeah, that's pretty much the end of it. There's a few other things, but it's kind of foot stomping the stuff that I've already said. Just from an overall perspective, I think it's important to understand that all of these things have significant implications, and the things that we don't even know behind the scenes that are happening, like these committees. I've not seen a single committee that was not a cover up for the CIA, not any. And that makes you wonder about what are all of the committees that they're doing now? What are they covering up? Right? Who are they covering up for? Because I've yet to see one. And I told you the one, they were investigating the CIA, and then they killed the station chief over in Greece. And then the CIA blames his death on I think that was the church committee. So they knock off one of their own in Greece and then blame the church committee. And then after the church committee finishes, nothing happens because the CIA blamed the Congress for looking into it.
It's such a wild web of corruption. You guys, we got a special thing that we're going to do for you. We're going to start doing at the end of these Gladio shows. But I want to remind everybody, if you haven't done so yet, shame on you. Smash that like, you guys. The other thing, a lot of you were saying, hey, I've been leaving comments, but they don't show. Whatever you put in the live chat stays in the, think of the live chat like Vegas. Whatever's said in the live chat never leaves the live chat because Rumble doesn't save it. So the live chat and Rumble comments are two separate things. So during the show, as you're interacting with us in the live chat, like you guys are, we see that real time, but the comment section is where you can memorialize something that you want to say or something you want to ask. So just want to make sure I put that out there. The other thing, as you see under the Colonel's Corner, you see hashtag International Syndicate, hashtag Operation Gladio. When you do share these things out, make sure you include those hashtags on social media. If you're making a comment about Gladio, include these hashtags, because what will happen is we can overtake these hashtags if for whatever reason they're used on something else, and people can start finding these comments or these links to information on Operation Gladio. So that's that. So before we get into the special segment, just two quick things, Colonel. DARPA. It's like this, don't say, don't mention, don't do shows on DARPA. It's like the carnal warning that I've received from people, like, don't do it. And of course, this is the Alpha Warrior Show. Nothing's off limits. We're going to talk about everything. Has that ever, kind of had any, intersections crossing with anything Gladio? I know it's newer.
Well, actually, the previous version was called ARPA, A-R-P-O, A-R-P-A. It's been around for quite a while. You're not going to find, I came across it only as like a corollary, for example, where like the Warbell guy that his whole claim to fame in the arms industry was he was doing suppressors for all kinds of guns, machine guns, and which would be very happy or very convenient if you were doing Gladio operations. And there were some casual links to some research projects that had gone on at ARPA/DARPA back in the day, just things like that. So I've not ever seen like a direct line that says this is this, because I would be online immediately talking about that. But what most people don't realize, for example, and I can say this unequivocally, it's obviously declassified now. When I got to Los Angeles Air Force Base, which had a very classified portion to it, one of the SAP programs, well, it had many, but it had a SAP location to it. And all of the other satellite programs, launch vehicles, the Titan, all of those were all bought at Los Angeles Air Force Base because it's Space Systems Division for the Air Force. And so any satellite, whether it was the GPS satellites, the weather satellites, whatever, they're all bought out there. They put the requirements out. They don't build them on the base. They submit the contracts to have them built to the local space industry out there. And so I realized the whole, there can be technology around for 30 years. Like GPS was around for a very long time. In the early 80s to late 80s, the 1980s, that the Air Force, the military, had began transitioning into civilian use. We had it around for a long time. And the same thing with just about everything. Their meteorology satellites, initially all classified, then transitioned for weather people at TV stations to use. So whatever they're doing at DARPA, it would be very difficult to be able to tie anything, because once we even know it exists, they're so far past that, it's not even funny.
And I'll bring this up on the screen real quick just to show people. So this, for those that are like, what the heck's DARPA? Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And I just found it funny that this is their homepage. When you type in DARPA.mil, this is what you'll get. And, it's just, this first thing meant you have the word gold in there. This next one, it looks like it's AI. The company's ARPA-H, but I mean, it looks like AI, right? And then the next one over here, you got deep fakes, terminology that,
it matters.
it does. And you would be told, no, this is conspiracy stuff, right? But, scroll right here, DARPA communities, just so people understand the reach that DARPA has. Universities, industries, small business, the government, the public, and media. Like, there's just be.
So my whole thing on the university thing, that was kind of, when I got my commission, my first job was Los Angeles Air Force Base as a second lieutenant. And I had no idea the extent to which the military, DARPA, relies on universities and subsidizes them to do research for them. So there was a particular school, because at the time we're developing satellites and we were doing space-based radar where you can actually take a beam of light and beam it off of a satellite and hit something to destroy it. So the whole optical capability and the looking at stuff, where you can get driver's license plates from vehicles off of satellites, that was all huge at the time. So I was told, because I was in HR, that I needed to go to this university and recruit people to join the Air Force ROTC program there. And it's a university it's Rochester University in New York. And they were created in the hometown of Kodak. So they focused on the whole optic thing, cameras and all of that stuff. And they developed some of the most high-tech cameras. And there was a crap ton of money that the Department of Defense uses for research projects there. And that's their niche. And a lot of these universities have these niches of stuff that they do for DARPA and for classified areas within the military. And I found that fascinating.
It's super fascinating. So this new part of the show we're going to be doing, you guys, is we're going to spend a few minutes and we're going to go into the comment section of the previous show, and we'll give you guys some fame. Now, be forewarned, if there's some foul language, obviously, I'll clean that up for the show. But if you come in here and you talk some smack, don't think because Alpha's professional, I won't talk some smack back, so we'll see. We'll play along within reason. So first on deck, and this comes from MSM Muir, love training day crazy. It was a clip from the last show. Good luck with these names, you guys. If I butcher them, DM me with the way to say them correctly. Ray. My gosh, all this is blowing my mind. Our government is a bigger piece of shit than I could have ever imagined. You know how I feel about that. Hallen Tower says, excellent information. Dragon Crony says, been sharing this series with someone new weekly. I found this information spiritually useful for the intervention of advancing this agenda. The revelation of this information is for a higher purpose. I like that, Dragon. Keeps going. For those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, hearts and minds to comprehend and understand that which is being shown and conveyed, go forth boldly in the light of love. We'll pin that one. I like that one. We'll see if someone can overtake that one. It reset me. So where are we going? Okay, so here we are continuing. Hold on, I gotta reset this. There we go. Okay, should be back on. We got someone from an hour ago. So let's jump in this. DJ Mal 85. I do not trust Flynn. Here we go. I'm gonna read it. I'm not gonna censor people, but I'm gonna push back on this already, you guys. I do not trust Flynn. Alpha even said Pandora's box. That is why Mike Gill has been talking about for years. Flynn is part of it, and Flynn worked for Obama way too long. If he was such a danger to the deep state, they would have discredited him and pushed him out then. He was and is part and is a plant in the Trump administration. And it continues in the next comment. Find it funny that everything she says about Nixon is a total opposite for that fraud 107 says. So let me just address this real quick. One, if you want to know my take on Mike Gill, I've addressed this, publicly on social media. I've addressed it on shows. I've interviewed Mike Gill, and there's a portion of what he says that I think is important. But I'll also say this: I've personally asked him to show me the evidence that he has that we've presented, and I haven't got it. And then when I made a public request to it, Mike Gill blocked me. And the one thing that was shown was a court document. Well, it's real. It's a court document. But you got to remember, what did Alpha do for his living? I was in law enforcement. I know court documents. And it says draft copy. Anybody can go create a court document and get a draft copy of it. Doesn't mean that was entered into the script of a court hearing. There will be a specific stamp that has a case number stamped on it. It'll have a court secretary's signature on it, and there's more information that goes with it. That's what I want to see. And when I asked for it, I was blocked. So each of you can take your own thoughts from that. Go ahead, Colonel.
Is that the one that's about the asset thing here in Florida?
No, this one wasn't on Florida. I know which one you're talking about. This one,
that's a fake.
Yeah, this one was related to something. It was related to New Hampshire, but like I said, it's a draft copy, and I can go to the court and submit a document and get a draft copy, from the girls that work at the front desk. It doesn't mean that the court accepted it per se.
Correct. That's the same thing with the one from Florida. It was, you can go online, you fill the whole thing out, you hit print, but it's until it has the stamps of it having been processed through the court, which that one that people had been passing around did not. So it was just printed off the internet. It's bullshit.
100%. In regards to Alpha using the words Pandora's box, let me get this on the record. And for those of you who've been following me from the beginning, I don't speak in code. I tell you, if there's more to what I'm saying, I tell you guys, think about it. Multiple meanings. But if I use something, open Pandora's box, I'm using the general reference to opening up Pandora's box. I don't like trickery. I don't use trickery. So if anybody's telling you, well, Alpha really means this, no, I don't. I tell you what I mean what I say. With regards to General Flynn, listen, everybody wants to use, well, Trump fired him and this and this and that. But these are the same people that say double meanings and triple meanings and 5D chess. Well, if that's what 5D chess is, you got to look at it from that lens. Because the one thing that everybody's against Flynn, no one has yet to address this with me, is just at the tail end of last year, and I said it in this show, President Trump called Flynn on the phone and publicly said, this man has sustained what no other man can take. If you listen to that call and you can't walk away with Trump loves this guy, then I don't know what to tell you. And then if you're going to say, well, Trump has hidden meanings, well, then that means your same mindset has to be used when Trump fired him. Trump has hidden meanings. If you're going to use the mindset of fifth generation warfare 5D chess, it applies to everything you say. You don't just get to say it applies here and it doesn't apply there. People's actions. And like I said, I support General Flynn. I support Trump. Flynn has been very public, especially recently, on his support of President Trump. So I'm going to leave that there. Like I said, you weren't disrespectful, so I don't block people and things like that. I think opposing opinions are important. But we'll carry on for now. We read Helen Teller. Oh, Thor Bellingham. Google conspirators hierarchy, the committee of 300. That fits nicely with Operation Gladio. Man, I really got to look into that committee of 300. I've heard so much about it, and I've just barely scratched the surface of it. Let's see. Ramam 4711. How fake everything has been. Money is mierda. Speaking some Spanish. That is shit for those that don't know. Always about money and power. This has to end. I agree with that. Saint. I'll go mass hole. People, I think it was a different meaning. Sounds like the weapons sales money necessary for operational funds of the deep state, codename Fast and the Furious under Eric Holder, dried up quickly. I wonder where all the billions of dollars for combating COVID-19 and PPP money went. Human trafficking cash is with Gladio glasses. OMG. Thank God for you sharing awareness and strength. I love that people can see these connections now.
Yes.
I mean, that is a tribute to you, Colonel, 100%. Baltus says, we are so blind in this country, all around the world, not just here, but I hear what you're saying. Here we have always thought that we are the shining light for the world. We have been so corrupt since the end of World War II. Once all the information is totally disclosed, we can go after all the corrupt people, politicians, and CIA, FBI, NSA. Shame on our country. Shame on our government. Our country's good people. We have to learn to separate country from government. Deplora, she's been around, long fan here. Deplora Laura, so good. I had to watch it 2 times. Thanks. I host these shows, you guys, and I watch them multiple times. So I'm with you on that one. Judy 369. I've heard of the Gemstone Papers and have read the New Zealand, Australia ones, which are known as the Opal or Opal Files here in New Zealand. It basically shows that virtually all of our prime ministers have been dodgy except Norman Kirk, and they knocked him off. CEOs of major companies also end up up to it in their eyeballs. Awesome to have found the Colonel, because she has joined a lot of my dots. Much appreciation to you both, and shout out to you watching us in New Zealand. That is freaking awesome. Tiger Bite 8, Colonel, what are the top 10 books that you would recommend for researching this subject matter? I'll have Colonel give her top 2 right now, and then Colonel can go in the comments and list this for everyone to find. What would you say the top 2 books?
Paul Williams, Operation Gladio, and Danielle, it's spelled the European way, Daniele, Gansler, Gansler. His is NATO's Secret Army. Those are the very first 2 books I read. I have not found any that surpass them for details, but there are several others. The fellow Badlander spouse, Cynthia Chong, The Land That the Black Sun Never Sits On. Her book is the one that goes back to the late 1800s and kind of goes through. It's a very long read, but when you get done with it, your brain just is like on overload as far as being able to understand why. It's not what, it's why. And her book answers the question why.
There we go. I've already read 3 Gladio books and the following: Strength of the Wolf, Strength of the Pack, Plot to Seize the White House, The Plots Against the President, The Grand Chessboard, Requiem for the American Dream, Who We Are, Treason in America, Dark Money and the Dark Side, NASA, Nazis and JFK, General Walker and the Murder of JK, The Old Boys, The Splendid Blonde Beast, The Haymarket Affair, The Witness Tree, Barry and the Boys, The Politics of Iran, The Phoenix Program. Are there other books you recommend that dovetail or dive deeper into this issue? Also, your work dovetails with Matthew Arndt 4-volume work, The Clash of Two Americas, and Cynthia Chung's The Empire of Which the Black Sun Never Sets. Looks like a lot of reading material there for people that want to find it. MN Steve, it seems that Nixon has a huge fan in Roger Stone. Funny that we saw his lookalike photo earlier. Stone calls Nixon a great president. What's up with Roger Stone? I'll comment to this one real quick. Listen, you guys, Roger Stone's a character. Absolutely. He's been friends with Trump. I mean, geez, probably like around 40 years or so. And Roger Stone, he's even tweeted things. I had this conversation with a friend the other day. He's retweeted things. It was Awaken Outlaw. That for those of you that follow the boards and stuff like that, Roger Stone's retweeted posts that address that. So I would just look at what Roger Stone says and does as a hat tip to look here. That would be my take on that. You want to add anything to that, Colonel?
I think that's accurately. I try not to make my job right now is I do have some hypotheses, but my job is to put the information out there. I can tell you what happened and where. I have lots of questions. And at some point, I would love to be able to have a philosophical, open conversation with people that is well versed in this as I am. My biggest question at this point is who really are communists, right? Because we have been lied to about what they are and who they are. What are they really? I don't want to appear to be an apologist or a fan of communism, because I absolutely am not. But when I use the story of Lumumba and I use the story of Castro, when they don't start calling them a communist until after they tell them to pound sand, are they really communist? I don't think they are, but then what are they? I don't know. Are they just a dictator? So I have lots of questions. And I think anybody that goes around and espouses the communist trope that we have been brainwashed into believing, I instantly, now that I am awake, I instantly lose credibility in them.
You have to. The vast majority of us have, especially recently, experienced some type of personal experience.
Yes.
That amplifies it. I mean, from 2020 and before, my government awarded me with congressional awards that called me a hero, an American hero.
Yeah, now you're a terrorist. So it's the same people calling you a terrorist, somebody's calling them a communist. So I don't believe you before.
And that's what I'm saying. A few months later, I say the government's attacking our First Amendment and Second Amendment, and just like that, I'm a terrorist.
Correct.
I mean,
and the same people that are calling you a terrorist were calling those people communist. Well, hello.
Absolutely. And for those people that are struggling right now, that's that cognitive dissonance. And trust me, I get you. I understand. That is how deep and sinister this programming that's been done to us. But you have to force yourself to look at these things through a new lens, your Gladio glasses.
And to me, the epiphany last week was Jonestown and Kool-Aid. The entire thing was a lie.
There's a lot of lies going on right now. This one comes from looks like Cheryl K. OMG, so much information. Going to have to listen from the beginning with a big pad of paper. Always have your notepad. Let's see. We got Mazik. Liz Fresno's is right near the Mexican border. I will have to look that one up. They also say, OMG, Traficante looks like Bill Murray. You can't unsee that one. I remember looking that one up. It does look like Bill Murray. Copper 4377, I believe Sturgis killed Kennedy. Yarn Addict. And if you want to respond to any of these things, just jump in and interrupt the Colonel.
Yeah.
Yarn Addict says, dang, every show the Colonel speaks on just blows my mind. She has made so many connections for me, and I'm glad she has popped up on many channels I follow. I would love to see her notes and diagrams. Maybe Dylan from the New Templars could make a cool map from the connections she has made. That would be pretty freaking
So
Awesome.
I tried doing that on one of those brain mapping things that it's like Kumi, Kumi. It's actually public, but it gets way so messy. And this is really a time evolution thing. So it really has to be more of a 3D thing. If somebody could work with me on that, oh my gosh. I mean, it would be amazing because we need it desperately.
Absolutely. If you have that skill set, please reach out so we can connect you with the Colonel. Let's see, music again. If this is the first one you're watching, go back and start from number 1. You'll be missing out. Prepare to have your mind blown. And all those shows are in the description below to make it easier for you. Gummerson, tremendous show. Wanda Lulu, E Hunt, like Ethan Hunt. I like that. I like what you're thinking there. JG45 makes me think of a movie that Cheech and Chong made called Corsican Brothers. I have to look that one up. Cheech and Chong. I'm just curious how you made a correlation with Cheech and Chong and Gladio, so I'm going to look that one up for sure. Beeman 1958. Now I understand why America has been called the Great Saint for 60 years that I know of. Heartbreaking, some of these things, but we'll fix our reputation. Gunner Mark 7 Alpha. I have concerns for Joel Altman. Listen, okay, then Kurt, the personal stuff, you guys, I'm going to skip over those. I'll respond to you individually if you want, because giving those things airtime sometimes when they're wrong, it just can be of large consequence. So Strick Terry says, fantastic show. I'm learning so much. Wow, such dirty dealings this world, including the U.S., has been up to. Waking up even more now. Thank you both. Well, now that you have woken up, go forth and teach, my young Jedi. J8JLS007. Interesting theories. Want to see the receipts, evidence. Guess I'll have to buy her book. Problem I have about fingering Nixon is he's such an easy target, was greatly hated by the left in the 60s and 70s. The problem I have is if you put this on Nixon, you can then absolve the CIA. Huge red flag here. I don't think Nixon was a drug dealer. Clinton, yes, lots of evidence. Nixon, no. I'm not a Nixon fan, but the dots she's connecting gives the CIA a pass. That makes no sense. We know the CIA is dirty. I know Colonel's going to want to respond to this. I'll start. First of all, Colonel doesn't have a book, you guys. One, I am pushing her behind the scenes to make a book because she needs to. But Colonel's not charging for this information. Colonel is not making money off this information. Colonel is teaching you because we are trying to save our republic, which is the lighthouse for the entire nation. Second, how can you watch any of these shows and think that any of this information is designed to give the CIA a pass? It is identifying the CIA as being one of the many parts of this Gladio thing that's responsible for all this. Colonel, I'll turn that one over to you.
What the heck? Maybe that person should go back and rewatch the entire thing. Number one, I'm not pinning anything on Nixon. I am telling you that Richard Nixon was the president at the time the entire Corsican mafia was eliminated. I am telling you the results of the war on drugs. Look it up. Do a Google search. How many people were addicted in 1968 to heroin, and how many people were addicted at the end of his administration? It went up like 5 times. I'm talking results. You can say he didn't have a thing to do with it. Fine. I'm telling you, as a president, when you commit to a war on drugs and the amount of drug addicted population in the United States skyrockets 5 times, you are a significant loser in my book. I don't care what your motivation is. So as a commander, if I take over a unit and a number of untrained people go up 5 times, I suck. That's all I got to say. That never happened under my command. Not a single statistic went contrary to the way it was supposed to go when I was in charge. So he bears responsibility, whether you want to say he personally even knew a thing about it. But then you have to make the argument. I don't have to prove it. You have to prove that he didn't know, which you can't. So yeah, to me, that's ludicrous. I'm not saying any of these people are good or bad. I'm presenting evidence. And I give you the names of the books that I have read that has all of this information in it. If I'm specifically talking about an article, I reference it when I'm talking to you. So it's all out there.
I agree with you, Colonel. It's kind of like Kamala being the border czar and our borders just being overrun. So we'll go to Joyce Hawley. Wow, this is great information. Thank you for sharing with us, Colonel and Alpha. I can't get enough. Me neither. I love knowing that every week I'm going to be learning something new. This has been fantastic, Colonel. Copper 4377. I believe the government learned tactical from the mafia, then discarded them when the mafia was no longer needed. I think they've used a lot of people.
The only thing that I would say to that is they are not discarded. So by folding in the mafia apparatus inside of the CIA with their front companies, they get plausible deniability from the government perspective. But they're still operating. And if anybody gets investigated, you and I talked about this. So they'll give them a low guy and say, here, you can go prosecute this guy, but you can't have Santo Traficano. You can have his street guy in Miami. And so they orchestrate the entire infrastructure of accountability to ensure that if this is how big it is, only these guys get prosecuted. None of these guys get prosecuted. So the mafia is still out there. They didn't go away. They just created an umbrella for them to protect them. And they give you these guys.
The little guys. All right, I'll fly through the rest of these. Bent ribbon. I need a flow chart to follow all this. We'll get to. We'll find a way. We will find a way. Frogger 808. Awesome show. Such invaluable education. Quote: the more I learn, the less I know. Yeah, I feel you on that one. But with Gladio glasses on, you can really read between the lines. Thank you. Go on to Janet Susan OD. This is information winfare. I like that. Information instead of warfare, information winfare. That was cool. Good on you, Janet. The Tribe of Dan. A hashtag pleasure to finally hear people it's a pleasure to finally hear people what they say what they think. I'll help you out on that one. Roy Rat, holy shit, great show. I feel you. Call sign Cujo, always here for the shows in the live chat, just like he is now, I'm sure. Wow. A man of many words, call sign. 562, damn, she's good. That's for the Colonel, because I'm a he. Yida 1914. I have shared with others your interviews with the Colonel. My favorite, absolutely my favorite series too. Kubi, awesome. Standing by. That's the final one. Enjoy the comments. The only tip I'll have you guys moving forward on this, if you guys have personal questions about other people, leave it out in the comments. You really want to know, ask me. I'll address it with you in the back channels, and just know, and you can share whatever I say. I'm never going to say something about somebody that I wouldn't say in public anyways, but I do want to keep these comments oriented to things that are around Operation Gladio. So hopefully you guys like that, and we'll have some more next week. Colonel, the final word, and where are we headed?
Well, I'm going to go back and do some other people that kind of feature prominently in here. I've got two in mind for the next show that have some very interesting backgrounds. But yeah, and I want to encourage everybody on X to, if you have anything like the one guy with the books, please post on my page at me so that we can share that with everyone. Some of those books that he listed are good books. A couple of them are not books that I would recommend, and I'd be happy to tell people why, and they can, make their choice on how they're going to spend their time. A lot of the books, I will tell everybody as a heads up, that I do are free on archive.org. I like that because it allows more people to be able to read it, and you can hit the little earphone button and have it play for you. And I'm all about saving people money. I do want to reiterate what you said. I don't make a dime doing this. I am doing this because I think it's the only way we can save our country. People have to know what's going on. To be an informed voter is the only way that we keep our republic. And so that's kind of my mission. I have on my Rumble channel, in all disclosure, I think there's like $50. I've already spent like $90. I sent one of my researchers a Kindle so she can help me research. So I've already spent way more than I'll probably ever make doing this. And that's kind of what I want to do. It's how I want to invest my time and my money in giving back. All of my education came from the taxpayers, and I feel an obligation to give it back.
Well, that's much appreciated, Colonel. But I will also invite this audience, links below to find the Colonel. Go subscribe to her Rumble channel. Go watch when she does these books, and just continue to learn. And here's the other thing: while you're watching these shows, drop a Rumble rant. And I know the Colonel is doing this because, you know, of one, her patriotism to this country. But I'm going to tell you guys from personal experience, there's so much time that goes into one's life to not just bring forth information, but accurate information and vetting. And you know what? It's nice when someone drops you $5 and says, "Go have a coffee on me." You know, it's the feel good goes a long way, you guys. Trust me, I know, because that's how you guys keep this show alive. Colonel, as always, it has been absolutely awesome. I look forward to next week, and it's just nice to see there's some big names that are sharing the Colonel's information, you guys. And I hope to see you continually grow the way you are, Colonel.
Thank you.
Are awesome. All right, you guys, the Alpha Warrior Show, first in, last out. Catch you guys next time. Semper Fi. Stick around for the commercials.
My Towels solved the problem that we've all had with towels. You go into the stores and they feel lotiony and soft, but then you get them home and they wind dry you. That's why I made My Towels. They actually work, they're soft, and they absorb. And now I'm excited to announce 2 brand new lines of My Towels. What makes them the best towels ever is they're now made with 100% long staple Shapir cotton. This is a combed ring spun cotton that makes My Towels even softer and more absorbent than ever. And now you get a 6-piece set for an amazing introductory sale price as low as $29.98. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get My Towels for only $29.98. Or you can get my designer premium line for just $20 more. Either way, you save 50% now on all My Towels. They actually work. What a concept. This offer won't last long, so please order now.
mypillow.com